Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Curious Case of the Clockwork Menace by Bec McMaster. Narrated by Alison Larkin. Chapter 1. London, 1877. Masculine laughter echoed through the hotel door, followed by a distinctly feminine giggle. Perry Lowell grimaced as the elevation chamber doors closed behind her at the Charing Cross Hotel. She could hear a faint murmur now, words she couldn't quite make out, and was grateful not to. She rapped her knuckles against the door. The laughter froze. A listening quality echoing through the stillness.
"If it's housekeeping, then we're not at home to visitors."
Another feminine giggle followed the man's words. "Get your backside out of bed, Garrett," she shot back. "It's Perry." That brought about a flurry of movement inside.
"Give me a moment."
"Oh, stay, love. Tell them to go away and stay with me," the woman cooed, as the sound of bare feet padded on the floorboards within.
"Business, I'm afraid."
His smooth voice hinted at a smile, and Perry could just imagine what was going on behind the door. Garrett snatching at his clothes as he winked, and made smooth promises to the friendly widow he'd been cultivating. She'd seen it all before. Women loved Garrett, and he loved women. Perry stepped away and peered through the window in the hallway, giving him the illusion of privacy, or perhaps not wanting to hear those whispered love words and promises he'd no doubt break. Garrett had been her partner for nearly 6 years after she'd arrived at the Guild of Nighthawks one night, soaked to the bone and shivering with the dark hungers of the craving virus. Her first few months as a blue blood had been horrendous as she struggled to rein in her bloodlusts as her body slowly changed, becoming leaner, faster, stronger, and hungrier. Not for food, though. Only blood. The door jerked open and Garrett appeared, his shirt still half unbuttoned and a bite mark on his neck. Perry caught a glimpse of the plump widow, who wore nothing more than the froth of sheets in the middle of the bed. An ice bucket housed an open bottle of champagne by the smell of it, and sheer gauzy lace fluttered over an open window beneath red, swagged drapes. The smile the woman had worn for Garrett faded as she caught sight of Perry, becoming a little sharper, a little narrower. Then the door closed, and it was just the two of them.
"I thought we had the day off," he said, buttoning the shirt to his throat and hiding that condemning mark.
"Unfortunately, someone forgot to mention that to the criminal classes," she replied. The scent of somewhat rancid lilies wafted through her sensitive nostrils as he drew closer. Perry screwed her nose up. "You smell like a whorehouse."
"And how would you know what a whorehouse smells like, my Lady Peregrine?"
Touché. As one of the only 2 female blue bloods in London, she was expected to be above reproach in all respects. The aristocratic echelon who ruled the city had decreed that only males were to be given the blood rights that infected a human with the craving virus and began the transformation into a blue blood. The echelon feared that a female's sensitive nature would be unable to deny the strong lusts and fierce cravings of the virus. Perry was determined to prove them wrong. She sipped her blood in private, using her own money to purchase it from the draining factories the government collected the blood taxes at, and maintained herself with a fierce decorum. Indeed, Garrett often told her she was almost puritanical, which bothered her a little. Not everyone could be as careless as he, though.
"So what is urgent enough to drag me from a rather pleasant bed?"
he asked, thundering down the stairs in front of her and slipping his black leather coat, the uniform of the Nighthawks, over his broad shoulders. "My apologies. Perhaps I should have waited another 5 minutes. That's how long the ladies keep your interest, isn't it?
They keep it for considerably longer than 5 minutes.
The sound of affront in his voice faded with the appearance of the devilish grin he shot her over his shoulder.
But not a great deal longer, you're correct. You shouldn't sound so prudish. All work and no play, Perry. Makes a girl dull.
That smarted. Does a murder sound interesting enough? The smile died on his face, his blue eyes sobering.
Who?
Holding on to her own frustration seemed petty too. An actress at the Vale Theatre, possibly?
Possibly.
The body hasn't been found yet. Only traces of blood, I'm told, whatever that means. Now that transportation had improved and the streets were safer at night, theatre had begun to face a little of a reconnaissance. Broad Street, in the middle of Soho, had begun with the intent of being as grand as nearby Mayfair, and, after a brief battle, had slowly given ground to the theatres, music halls, and brothels. They disembarked from an omnibus near the Newcastle upon Tyne pub, and Garrett scanned the cobbled streets. Eating houses and pubs lined the streets, though a man could find much more than something to serve his stomach if he looked for it. The occasional window advertised French lessons given, and Garrett had seen places where they corrupted the tableau vivant's art form into something a little more risque. At night, women of ill repute would stroll the streets with their skirts edged just high enough to reveal their petticoats. He'd seen worse, growing up in the East End, though he preferred not to think about his past. Still, he usually felt more than a little pity when he saw the hard-etched desperation on the women's faces, and the tight, false smiles they displayed. There was nothing he could do about it, of course, but he never forgot that his mother had worn a smile like that, toward the end.
"Have you ever been to a play?" he asked Perry, in order to shake off the grim thoughts plaguing him.
She looked as solemn and sober as always, her short dyed black hair pomaded into neat glossy strands. It often hung over her grey eyes as if she were hiding from the world, but wearing it swept back like that gave a sharp slant of her cheekbones and the firm set of her chin. A stubborn chin. It matched her well. Only Perry could frustrate him enough to make him want to bang his head against the wall. They'd been partners for nearly 6 years, and he still sometimes felt as though he barely knew her. She was good at what she did. She could track a criminal from the barest scrap of scent, and she was devilishly clever. Some of the men ribbed him for having to work with a female, but none of them knew what Garrett did. He'd volunteered. Having her as a Nighthawk went against all of the rules, and had set the guild on its ear. She might be a blue blood, but she was a woman. As far as half the lads went, it should have been the end of the story. If the echelon had gotten wind of it, well, they'd come down harshly on rogue blue bloods like himself, those that had been infected by chance, not selection, and Garrett didn't care to think of what they'd do to a woman, force her into an asylum perhaps. Someone had to keep an eye out for her, and he knew he was the best choice. Glancing at the playbill, she hesitated. I'm not a complete bore. I have seen several plays a long time ago. It's difficult now that I'm a Nighthawk. I rarely know when I'm going to get a day off. This was interesting. He knew next to nothing about her life before the Nighthawks, but there was no point asking for more. She'd only clam up.
"I've heard of this one," he replied, instead. "A Season for Scheming. Mrs. Scott claimed it's terribly wicked and witty."
Is this Mrs. Scott of the rumpled bed-sheets this afternoon?
Yes.
Though he could think of a dozen other ways he could refer to the widow. Mrs. Scott of the very ample cleavage, or Mrs. Scott of the very clever tongue. Garrett smiled to himself. Her prejudices were showing.
One would think you raised in a nunnery."
"My favourite play was Phèdre."
There was a wistful note in her voice that he nearly missed. Good God, did the Sphinx just reveal something about herself? They were forced to part around a pair of ladder men, with their cans of paste, ladder, and posters advertising Tuckson's luxury soap, then came back together. "A tragedy?"
"Not everything has to be a comedy, Garrett."
"Life is meant to be laughed at. How else can you keep smiling in this kind of world?" She looked startled, then thoughtful. "I'm not trying to be philosophical. You and I both know the reality of the London streets. There's nothing better than a good comedy or a night out with the lads to clear those kind of memories and make it easier to forget the day's case."
"I read," she admitted. "It takes my mind off the worst cases."
They both fell silent. With the ruling class of blue bloods deeding humans few rights, there was little he hadn't seen in the course of his investigations. Bodies drained of blood and discarded in the gutter like so much refuse, or young girls kidnapped off the streets and sold into slavery. It made a man weary in a way that could threaten to drown a soul. "Here we are." He paused in front of the Vale Theatre. The poster advertised murder, mayhem, and mistaken identity. "Well, we've got 2 out of 3, he said, pushing open the door and ushering her inside. The moment they entered the Vale, a small crowd of people hastened to meet them. 2 of the women looked visibly distraught, whilst the man in front swallowed hard before coming forward to meet them with an outstretched hand. "Nighthawks, Reed and Lowell." Garrett flashed his identity card at them. "Thank goodness," the man replied. "I'm Mr. Fotheram, the director. This is my wife, Mrs. Fotheram, and Miss Radcliffe, our lead understudy. She's the one who found Miss Tate to be missing." Garrett tugged out his pocketbook and flipped to a blank page. "Missing? I thought the telegram said murder." They all shared a glance, then hurried to speak in a mangle of voices. He managed to work out the logistics. Miss Nellie Tate was the actress playing the lead role in the play and had gone missing earlier that morning. Miss Radcliffe, her understudy, had gone to fetch her for a final rehearsal for tonight's opening and found only a few drops of blood in her room. "And no sign of her since?" Garrett continued with a friendly smile. The actress's shoulders softened as she shook her head. "Nellie's always so punctual. 6 hours is a notable length of time for her to be missing. She's not at her home," Miss Radcliffe finished. "We sent one of the stagehands to check, and, well, the blood, you see." "Any relatives we might be able to talk to?" Miss Radcliffe bit her lip. She was the type of woman who seemed to overplay every emotion, but he wasn't entirely certain if that meant she was hiding anything or whether she was simply overdramatic. She was also very lovely, he noted, in an entirely masculine way that had nothing to do with the case. "Nellie never spoke of anyone," Miss Radcliffe admitted, "though I gained the impression that her mother never approved of her stage ambitions. I believe there might have been words said at one point, and that Nellie had nothing further to do with her parents." "What's going on?" The loud voice cut through the quiet of the theatre. A gentleman snatched his bowler hat from his head and strode down the aisle. From the finely waxed points of his moustache to the elegant ruff of sable fur along his coat collar, his appearance screamed money. "Lord Rommel!" Mr. Fotheram stepped forward. "I'm afraid there's been some terrible news." A blue blood of the echelon, then. Garrett's gut tightened. "Lord Rommel?" He stepped forward and offered his hand. The man shook it with a firm grip, his dark eyes raking over the group as Garrett introduced himself. I'm Detective Garrett Reed of the Nighthawks. You're somewhat underdressed, aren't you?
Rommel's gaze slid over his attire.
I wasn't expecting to be called out today.
Garrett snapped his pocketbook shut. With his extraordinary blue-blood senses, he could smell a faint hint of blood about the man. No doubt just his lordship's lunch, though it was quite unexpected to see a blue-blood out and about during the day's harsh sunlight.
Lord Rommel is one of the theatre's owners, Mr. Fotheram interceded. He often comes to peruse a rehearsal. What's all this about, Fotheram?
Rommel's dark brows drew together as he tugged off his shiny black leather gloves.
I thought we were due for rehearsal. Not Nighthawks.
It's Miss Tate, my lord, Miss Radcliffe said earnestly. She's been missing all day, and there's blood in her room.
Rommel froze. Nellie's missing.
Nellie? Garrett slid a glance toward Perry, whose brow twitched faintly.
Well, what are you standing around for? Rommel snapped. I thought you Nighthawks were part bloodhound. Off you go. You bring her back. She's a valuable asset to this theatre.
She might be dead. Garrett ground his teeth together. He was used to dealing with the echelon lords.
I was just about to recommend such a thing, he said. Miss Radcliffe, would you care to escort us to Nellie's dressing room? Mr. and Mrs. Fotheram, no doubt we'd like to speak with all the theatre staff shortly, if you could arrange for that.
Still smiling, he shot Rommel a look.
That includes you too, my lord. Me?
Rommel looked aghast.
You want her back as soon as possible, don't you?
Garrett asked, trapping the man. Rommel's jaw worked, his eyes darting at the assembled witnesses.
Yes, of course.
So what do you think? Perry watched as Garrett prowled the room. Nellie Tate's dressing room was significantly more opulent than expected. A painted silk screen stood in the corner with a red robe discarded over the top of it, and a good half-dozen slippered heels were scattered around the base of the wardrobe. A splash of blood sprayed up the screen, and Garrett examined it, particularly the height and size of the spatter. His jaw locked tight. No doubt the scent of the blood was rousing the darker, more predatory part of his nature.
Not enough blood to be deadly, he said, with a tight swallow, but she, or someone, was certainly struck a blow, most likely to the head.
Perry caught a glimpse of herself in the enormous mirror in the corner as she circled the room, a dark blot of shadow in the cocoon of pink wallpaper. She felt distinctly out of place here. For a theatre starlet, she's certainly earning more than Miss Radcliffe. Perry glanced through the items on the vanity. Expensive mother-of-pearl hairbrushes, a gleaming silver clockwork-locking jewellery box with expensive pieces strewn carelessly inside, powders, brushes, and a brooch that would cost 6 months' worth of Perry's wage. The difference between Miss Radcliffe and Nellie Tate's attire was immediate.
It depends if all of this comes from her wage, Garrett disagreed, or a lover. Blue-blood lords frequently take an actress as a mistress, especially if she were as beautiful and witty as Miss Tate supposedly is.
Something to inquire about, Perry noted. There was a long, polished chestnut box, almost hidden in the corner. It seems strange that Miss Radcliffe made no mention of a lover. She'd talked almost non-stop about Miss Tate on the way to her rooms.
What have you found?
Garrett followed her toward the box. I'm not quite certain. Perry knelt and examined the case. It's locked.
Allow me.
Usually he carried a lockpick set with him, but his afternoon with Mrs. Scott had obviously left him unprepared. Perry plucked one of the pins from Miss Tate's dresser and handed it to him. Sometimes she wondered if Garrett had ever been on the wrong side of the law. He was very good at getting into places he wasn't supposed to or unlocking doors that were latched. The lid sprang open, light gleaming back off the metal inside. Perry frowned. What in blazes? Garrett lifted the item out, his hands cupping beneath the smooth curve of a metal thigh and caressing the elegant calf. It's a mechanical leg. A woman's leg. Of course he'd noticed that. Perry knelt down, running her fingers over the creation. It seemed designed to fit within a matching metal hip socket, and the patella floated free. The work was exquisite, with all of the hydraulics and pistons hidden inside smooth steel sheeting. Quite often the work on a mechanical limb was crude and the spars bare to the gaze. This obviously cost someone quite a lot of money. No synthetic skin, Garrett noted. He rolled it over, revealing elegant brass flowers etched down the outside of the thigh, like the embroidery on a stocking. Perry tilted the foot, noting the flex of it. The knee joint also moved in response. I've never seen the like. Not unusual. Most mechs don't advertise their disability. For good reason. Most mechs were trapped in the walled enclaves the Echelon owned, where they were forced to work off their mech debt to the government in payment for their new limbs or clockwork organs. Sometimes those debts took 15 or 20 years to pay back. Do you think it belongs to Miss Tate? If it did, then how the devil did the actress afford to pay for such a creation? The sheer artistry of the limb dictated at least a 20-year stint in the enclaves. Not certain. Garrett traced his fingers over the joints, searching for the numerical stamp that would indicate which enclave and mech the limb had been registered to. If it is Miss Tate's, then I doubt she would have mentioned it to anyone. The ruling echelon might have thought humans a lesser class than blue bloods, but at least humans had some rights. A mech, on the other hand, was considered not completely human with their mechanical enhancements. If it is Miss Tate's, then I doubt she had a blue blood lover, Perry said. She couldn't have kept something like this secret, and he'd have been disgusted. There's no serial number. What? Every mechanical limb is required by law to be registered, unless it wasn't created in the enclaves. But the only other blacksmiths belong to the Echelon, and they're kept under lock and key. Only the Echelon's blacksmiths knew the secret to creating truly functional biomech limbs, where flesh combined with steel, tendons fusing to hydraulic cables as if they were one. And this limb, as fine as it was, had never been fused with flesh. The hip socket gave it away. Garrett frowned. The other question is, if this is Miss Tate's, then why is it here? And where is she? There doesn't appear to be another case, so we have to presume this is the only limb she owns. If it isn't, then I think I ought to become an actress. It certainly seemed to pay better than a Nighthawk. I'd like to see that, Garrett drawled. You on stage trying to feign emotion? It wasn't as if she hadn't spent the past 6 years hiding everything. Perry snorted under her breath. If only he knew just how good an actress she truly was. He smiled, then surveyed the room. The smile died. No sign of a struggle apart from the blood. Think they hit her from behind? Perhaps. Either way, it indicates someone she knows. How did they remove her, then? Perry glanced at the bloodied screen. Nobody claims to have seen anything unusual. The whole place is a warren, Garrett replied. I don't think I could have found my way here without Miss Radcliffe to guide us. Perhaps it's easy to slip about unseen. "Let's do a thorough search here, then, just to be certain there's nothing we missed," she said, turning back to the vanity and the letters there. "Then we'll see what else we can find in the rest of the theatre." They spent the next couple of hours thoroughly interviewing the actors and actresses. Garrett took the lead. He was far more comfortable with making an interrogation seem like a conversation, and he swiftly put the suspects at ease, flashing quick smiles at the ladies. Perry watched, with her arms folded over her chest and her eyelids lowered sleepily. People's expressions and the tone of their voice were often far more telling than they thought, and if they were hiding something, she might be able to pick it up. Her first instinct of Miss Radcliffe made her back bristle. The pretty young actress had a wealth of naturally curly red-gold hair, and she blinked earnestly at Garrett as he questioned her. Garrett's smiles grew a little deeper, and Perry glanced away as she felt the mood of the room shift. Miss Radcliffe's anxious expression relaxed, replaced by a slightly coy smile, and when he asked her if Miss Tate had been seeing someone, she rested her hand on his sleeve. The woman was beautiful. It shouldn't have mattered. She was exactly the type of waifish pretty blonde that usually caught Garrett's attention, and it was clear it was caught. "I couldn't say," Miss Radcliffe said in response to his question. "Nearly. Well, I've not realized until now, but she was the sort who always asked questions about you rather than telling you anything about herself." A pretty blush stained her creamy cheeks. "Some of the other girls have, well, admirers, but not Nellie. Nor myself." Garrett glanced up from his notebook, and the faintest of smiles curled over his mouth as their eyes met. Good grief. Perry pushed away from the door. Garrett shot her a look, and she made a circling motion with her finger, letting him know she was going to have a look around. What did it matter if he was flirting with a witness? It wasn't the first time she'd seen him take an interest in a young, attractive woman. It certainly wouldn't be the last. Perry prowled her way across the stage, pushing the thought from her mind. She spoke to several of the stagehands on her way, gaining a good appreciation for Miss Tate. The results were conclusive. Kind-hearted, not like some of those actresses you get who usually play the starring roles. I couldn't possibly fathom who would actually want to hurt her. What did Miss Tate do after hours? She asked the man who managed the lighting. Was she walking out with anyone? Couldn't rightly guess. His gaze slid away. She kept to herself a lot. A frown before he looked at her earnestly. You don't think she's in trouble, do you? Well, she did get them flowers, remember, Ned? One of the stagehands called, on her birthday. He tipped his head to Perry. I'd almost suspect she had a beau, though she never mentioned one, but she were awful excited about the flowers. Showed 'em to everybody, and they was only peonies. Considering she gets sent roses all the time from the patrons, you wouldn't think they was much, would you? Get some regular light now. Perry jotted that down. Interesting. No doubt theatre rumour had been all over that little titbit. When were they delivered? After a performance? No, during rehearsal. First time she's ever stopped a rehearsal. The man shook his head. Wanted to get 'em straight in a vase before they wilted. Very interesting. Perry tapped the pen against her notebook. It looked like Miss Tate had a beau. And, she thought, her eyes narrowing slightly, it hadn't taken Garrett's rapport with people to work it out, which was a good thing, considering his current distraction. Chapter 2. Something bothering you? Garrett asked, as they hopped down from the omnibus, a half-mile from Nellie's home. Stormy grey eyes, the colour of thunderclouds, glanced up at him, but Perry looked slightly distracted. What? Garrett shifted the case with Miss Tates's leg inside it, getting a better grip on the handle as they turned toward Nellie's house. You seem distracted.
A long, moody silence ensued.
No, just some things never change, do they?
I'm not certain what you mean.
Perry finally looked up from her boot.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?